Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for waiting for us. We had a slight technical hiccup, but here we are. Welcome to this final Tegenlicht meetup of this year. Unfortunately, due to the current lockdown, we are here now again without a physical audience, but luckily you are here with us online in this livecast setting that we created. We're going to make the best of it in these times, and we are very happy that we're able to continue the series in this digital form. All right, so tonight we're going to reflect upon the VPRO Tegenlicht episode Wijze Lessons from Afghanistan, Wijze Lessen van Afghanistan, which was broadcasted last Sunday. And the documentary reflects on the past, the present and the future of the country of Afghanistan and the role of the West and the international community within that. It explores for the hard lessons that we have to take from 20 years of involvement in Afghanistan. So together with the filmmaker, various speakers here, both in the studio, but also a speaker online, we are going to discuss these issues. But we also really hope that even though you're with us online, you will also participate in this conversation. And you can do that to log in via Zoom or to comment on the Facebook stream that we are also broadcasting on our Pakkers de Zwijger Facebook channel. But if you log in through Zoom, you can talk with the other people in the audience on the chat, and you can ask a question through the Q&A function to one of the speakers. That question will arrive here with me, and then I will try and integrate it into the conversation. So please, if you have any comments or questions, please share those with us. And you can find the Zoom link on our website, but also in the email that you received when you registered for this session. So I hope you will be able to find it. All right, let's get started. We're going to start with a quick talk on the making process of this documentary, but also on the current situation that's happening now in Afghanistan. We will speak with the filmmaker Suchen Tan and with Wally Hashimi, and Wally is the CEO and founder of SAW Afghanistan, but was also involved in the making process of this film. Very happy that you're here. Before we get started, we're gonna watch the first clip of the documentary, in which we see Jonathan Powell, former chief staff of Tony Blair between 1997 and 2007, and he discusses the role and the consequences of the decision made by the US to pull back from Afghanistan last August. There we go.
The Afghan people do feel that they were deserted. They feel that the West came in, started to rebuild the country, and most of the majority of the population welcomed the changes that were made in Afghanistan. And most of them, I think, didn't believe that the West would leave quite so precipitously, quite so suddenly, but we did. So yes, I think we have let them down in what we've done. And we should have thought of other ways of doing this. And it wasn't impossible, even in that last stage of the negotiation, even after the deal had been done between the Taliban and the US, if the Americans had maintained conditionality, if they'd said, we will only implement this agreement if you implement your part of the deal, and your part of the deal is to reach an agreement with the Afghan Republic. If they'd applied that conditionality, there could have been a real negotiation between the two sides. Instead of which, President Biden said that American forces were going to leave, and he explicitly said there would be no conditionality. They were leaving regardless.
After 20 years, $1 trillion spent, 2,448 Americans killed, 20,722 more wounded, and untold thousands coming home with unseen trauma to their mental health. I will not send another generation of Americans to war in Afghanistan with no reasonable expectation.
All right, so mentioned before, Wally, Suchen, welcome. Great to have you here. Suchen, you're a filmmaker. You have made several documentaries for VPRO Tegenlicht, which also really look at the Middle East and zoom in on stories like these. I remember the one Wijze lessen van het Midden-Oosten, even a similar title, right? It was 2015, 2016, I think.
Around that time, yes.
Yeah. So why did you decide to make this specific documentary?
Well, there is perhaps a bit of a resemblance between the two situations, a kind of a déjà vu feeling, like, no, it's not going to happen again, hopefully. We always try to look at the bigger, broader picture in an event like this. We have had a lot of news stories about Afghanistan lately, because it was all about people who we tried to get back to the Netherlands, trying to give them a kind of a safe haven. But at the same time, we are always interested in trying to look at the bigger story behind it. What's behind it? How should we look at this kind of an analysis? And always also try to see what can we learn from this, because these are the big movements in history, you know, the big moments in history where something happens and you realize that things might completely change for a whole generation or for a country. How should we handle this? How should we behave? What is the responsibility of the West? We've been involved in this country for a long time. It's always difficult to step in, but it's even more difficult to pull out in a situation like this. It's almost impossible, I think.
You mentioned big changes, right? Big changes worldwide.
These big shifts in history.
Yeah, and I think one of the people that you interviewed in the documentary even resembled it with the fall of the Berlin Wall,
right?
Like other really pinpoint moments that he connected this moment to as well.
Yes. Well, these are the kind of major shifts when you know, when things happen in a certain region. It always has a lot of effects on the whole world, in fact. Yeah. And that's also why it's so difficult to understand that it's not only about your own country and not only about the Netherlands or about Europe or about whatever France is doing. It's everything that happens in Afghanistan will affect us as well.
Yeah.
And if you cannot understand that, and if you don't want to see how it affects us, then it's really, I mean, you have to look at it from a broader perspective. If you don't do that, you're making the same mistakes again.
Yeah.
That's I think the story.
Yeah, and one of the ideas was to really collect lessons, right? To look for insights from the last period. Was there something that really stood out to you, which was the most important lesson that you took from this project?
Well, I was very much impressed by the voice from within Afghanistan, the people who are still there, who have to deal with this situation, who have to, you know, handle it. Yeah. I was very much impressed by Mahbouba Sarraj, who was the lady in one of the four speakers. Yeah. When you hear her perspective, how she looks at it, but also how she looks at us. And she's making a clear appeal to the West, like, try to understand what is happening here. I found that very impressive, the way she has this clear view on what's going on there. Yeah. So that for me was the most interesting part. But at the same time, we try to find multiple perspectives in this story. So not only the perspective from Afghanistan, but also our own Western perspective, in the sense of Dick Berlijn, who was our chief of staff in the Netherlands, we sent out our boys to Afghanistan, to Uruzgan, to participate in this whole thing.
And girls, huh?
And girls. Yeah. So we try to find different perspectives on this story and see from different angles how people view it, what kind of lessons they draw from it.
Yeah. And Wally, you are the founder and CEO of SAW Afghanistan. Maybe first, what is that exactly? What do you do with SAW Afghanistan?
This is a media production company that I found in 2019 there, and is mainly run by local talents and local Afghans that I collected from the city, from the country, and gave them a chance to do some great jobs. And basically we tried to work with the international community as projects there to produce media products, multimedia products, like, you know, with a special focus on the woman rights and woman participation in the society, and also for the you know, international development projects, beneficiary videos to show to the Western people what happens there, because sometimes a lot of projects happens there, but nobody knows what's happening.
Yeah, the
And so we had to bring it in picture and through the multimedia products, and also in the meantime, you know, helping or cooperating with the Western media and journalists to facilitate them produce documentaries and you know, bring the stories from Afghanistan to the West.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you were actually in Afghanistan, I think, until July of this year, right?
Yes,
quite recently.
I was till July 15th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you left, and you were part of the team that made this documentary a reality. What was your specific role in this film?
My specific role was to cooperate with FEPIRO and help them, you know, to cover the interviews and media production in a complicated situation after fall of Kabul and Afghanistan and Taliban's takeover.
Yeah.
And it was a sensitive time, so we tried to work together and make it happen, to interview, you know, one of the sensitive figures in Kabul, which was security-wise not really easy at that time, just after fall of Kabul. And yeah, luckily that happened, and it happened successfully.
Yeah.
And I like to see it back now. But I was, you know, the important part was that I was in the Netherlands and Germany, and I ran this project from here. And the team was in Kabul, and I had to call them and manage it from here.
Yeah, under extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it like for you to work on this documentary, specifically in these chaotic, extreme times?
I think it's for me, it was very interesting and also important to see that Afghan people were kind of left behind, and unpredictably, they were, you know, the international community left Afghanistan, and the people wanted to talk about their ideas, and their voice should come out. Yeah. And I like to help to bring the voice of the Afghan people to the international community, especially the voiceless voice of the woman, as you know, the Mahbouba Saraj say that. Yeah. And that was very interesting for me, and very important.
To be able to make a contribution.
To help this happen, yeah.
Yeah. So you recognize yourself also in what Jonathan Powell says, the Afghan people were really left alone, left behind by the US.
That's absolutely right, because the last 20 years, the international community led by the US, they spent billions of dollars, and they lost men there, the soldiers, and a lot happened. And the international community, especially the US, they signed a strategic agreement with Afghanistan, and they always promised the Afghan people to stay with them and never leave you behind, and we will defend the last 20 year. We will defend the last 20-year achievements. And people were very sure that they were partnering with the international community, with the West, and they were happy. And one important point is that never in the history of Afghanistan you can read that the Afghan people in majority-wise supported the international community, West and US, to be there, to work together. And in this case, it happened.
And it worked also.
It worked as well. Yeah, it worked. Yeah. And we see the achievements there, the women's rights, the education, the health infrastructure, except the security problem and the political settlement. That was a problem. But then at once they left Afghanistan, and the Afghan people were disappointed. Why this happened? So you promised always that we stay with you and we'd never leave you behind. And then it happened in one night.
Yeah, like thieves in the night.
And people were just disappointed, and they didn't know what happened and what to do. And we witnessed the chaos at the Kabul airport.
Yeah. Well, I think that emotion was also really clearly expressed by the same person that you mentioned before, Mahbouba Serraj, this human rights activist in Afghanistan, that touched you the most as well in the making of this film, but that you also helped arrange this specific interview with her. Can you tell me a little bit more about her, because I found.
Well, when I spoke to her on the phone, she was explaining to me what she was working on. She is running a safe house, I think, in Kabul for women who want to leave their homes, who are not in a safe situation, so they want to leave their homes. And then she says here in Afghanistan, there's nowhere that they can go, so we offer them a safe place. We offer them help and assistance, etc. So that's a very important kind of network that she's opening, not only in Kabul, but also in provinces, I think. So she has been doing lots of projects like that, I think.
Yeah, for years and years.
She was, at the beginning, she was already there. So she is a very impressive lady, I think.
Yeah.
And also the fact that she is still wants to speak out, even in these times where where everything has changed, that she still is not afraid to step out and talk about it.
Well, she says
not be intimidated.
It's a luxury I cannot afford myself anymore to be afraid in these times.
So that's I think she's really a powerful voice coming out of Afghanistan that needs to be heard.
Well, what is her position within Afghanistan? Is she well known? Is how big or strong is the movement that she is leading?
I think she's very, very popular and a very strong woman, and I know her from years ago. But I worked closely with her since 2019 when I was working for a Dutch NGO called Coordinate. So we had to cooperate with the Afghan Women Network, which was one of the main networks in Afghanistan to lobby and do advocacy for women.
Which she established.
She is one of the founders and supporters of that network, and that is one of the biggest networks in Afghanistan. So they have done a lot of work for women advocacy and woman participation in the society, woman emancipation. And she's coming from the US and the Afghan-American woman, and a very popular and a strong woman.
We're gonna see her in a later clip as well tonight. Okay, so we're almost going to the next part. I see that we also have a specific question from someone in the audience for you, also, Sujan, so I want to give some attention to that.
Yes,
it's a question from Sjors Beenker, and he says, why are fossil fuels not mentioned once in the documentary? General Berlin stated that this war never has been about human rights, though about the gas pipeline from Kazakhstan to the seaport in Pakistan.
Yeah, so what is the question exactly?
So why aren't fossil fuels part of the storyline in the document?
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting story in itself, I think.
That requires another film.
Afghanistan is a very rich country, in fact, with a lot of resources that are still there to be harvested. And that's also what I think Mahbouba Serraj is mentioning when she's talking about a cow, that everybody has always, he's almost dying, but they still want to go into Afghanistan because of all the resources. And of course that is maybe the background of this whole geopolitical battle, is of course also about who is getting into that country to get to all these resources. And maybe if you look at the future, that is something that we should look at indeed, because once the US can pull out, but who will step into this situation to play a role in this?
I would like to add one more thing, which is complication in Afghanistan due to the complicity of the geopolitics there. And sometimes in one documentary you can't cover everything.
No,
There's too many things.
You should make a whole series there, about this, in fact.
It's about, fossils, and it's about, drugs and a lot of other things there going on. And, a strategic location of this country and the region. So, sometimes you make a choice what should be included in the documentary. You can't cover everything. There's a lot going on there.
So who knows? Absolutely. Maybe a next
next project. Maybe.
Next project. Yes.
Could be.
Sijan, for now, I would really like to thank you. Wally will stay with me the entire evening, so I'm very, very pleased with that. But we're gonna have a look at the second part of the second fragment of the documentary that we chose for tonight. And in that one, Kishore Mahbubani is speaking, and he's a former diplomat and former UN ambassador from Singapore, and he shares his perspective on the international community and specifically the United States and how their work in Afghanistan had failed. So we're going to have a look.
Well, the fundamental mistake that the United States made in Afghanistan is that it didn't even study the history of Afghanistan. It didn't ask a simple question. Why did the British fail so badly in Afghanistan? Why did the Russians fail so badly in Afghanistan? Answer is simple. They didn't try to understand Afghan history, culture, tradition. And they assume that you can come in from outside and transform the country. You can't. I think the structural failures in Afghanistan reflect an inability of the United States to understand that when you're dealing with a different society, a different culture, a different civilization, you have to adapt to it. But instead, what the United States administrators in Afghanistan tried to do was to say, hey, this is the book on how you build a democracy in America. And they brought the American democracy book to Afghanistan. And they said, they didn't even ask, hey, does it fit Afghanistan? Does it fit the culture? Does it fit the people? And of course it didn't.
All right, so new guests at the table. Najib Azad, you're a political activist and you used to work for the European Commission as a scholar, I believe, and also for the United Nations, working on several projects also in Afghanistan. Yeah. Great to have you here. Nilab Ahmadi, you're an activist at Azadi, political youth movement that you started, I think, also yourself, specifically for Dutch Afghans, and you are also a policy maker for Waarin here in Amsterdam. Welcome. And Wally's still with us. And then on Zoom, we have Jorrit Kamminga, who is an associate fellow at the research department of the Klingendaal Institute. Hi, Jorrit. You are also the writer of a book. It's really new. I think you presented it quite recently, last month or something, on the Dutch political history in Afghanistan over the past 20 years. Je wordt bedankt, Bin Laden. So thank you very much, Bin Laden. So great that we also have you here, Jorrit. Let's first dive into this book, because this title, of course, triggers us all a bit. What is the main perspective that you take from your analysis of the last 20 years of Western involvement in Afghanistan?
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me. I hope the irony of the title is clear. It's perhaps not as clear as it is in the Dutch one. But I think, yeah, my book has one part which is about Afghan reality, and it has the second part which is what I call the Hague reality, so the political reality. And basically, I look in that part, I reconstruct the past 20 years of the Dutch political debate, right? So that's interesting in itself. But in the first part, similar a little bit to the documentary, and congratulations on the documentary. I thought it was really good. Similar to the documentary, I also go back in time to 9/11 and to see how that whole over-ambitious state-building project started, right? In the documentary, they talk about Operation Enduring Freedom, which is more, let's say, the counter-terrorist part of it. But from the start, from 2001, we also start with this enormous state-building perspective, and with, I think, a lot of good intentions. So it's definitely not sort of like an imperialist motive, definitely not for the Netherlands, right? We really want to help the Afghans, and we definitely didn't want to abandon them this time.
Okay. And then if you look at the clip that we just saw, Kishori there mentioned that one of the biggest mistakes was that the US didn't take into consideration at all that the blueprint that they were putting on the country of Afghanistan might not match that country. Is that also something that came up in your analysis as one of the main issues?
Yeah, it's not a new analysis, right? There have been also academics that have been calling, this whole idea of social engineering, that basically you can come to a country from the outside and you can sort of like use a screwdriver to change the society. There has been one American scholar, for example, John Mearsheimer, who has been saying this all the time about Afghanistan and Iraq. It is a big problem. I do think that we, as the Netherlands, we try to understand the culture. We try to understand the Afghan people, right? We had a cultural advisor also when the Dutch had a mission in Uruzgan for 4 years. But it's true that most of what we tried to do was sort of like a ticking the box. You know, it has to be a liberal democracy. So they need a parliament, they need a constitution. So let's tick all those boxes. And then we wait for a miracle to happen, right? So indeed, we also didn't know how difficult it was.
Okay, there are some small issues with the connection with you, but we could hear you perfectly. So I'll get back to you in a second, Jorrit. Nilab, you are active here in the Netherlands. You started this youth movement called Azadi. Azadi, yeah. So, how did you look at this fragment in the documentary? Do you also think that this blueprint thinking, the social engineering, is one of the main issues when looking at how the last 20 years worked out?
Well, I think, first of all, Azadi, I started with some other Afghans, definitely not just me. I would have to say I highly disagree about the war in Afghanistan not being imperially motivated. I think the problem with talking about this war is that when we talk about 9/11, it really didn't start there. I mean,
that was not the beginning point. Yeah.
Definitely not. I mean, the beginning point was the fact that Afghanistan became a nation state. But it is not a nation nor a state. It is a conglomerate of different areas where indigenous people lived, and they had no say in how that state was built. That was imposed on them by the West. That was the very beginning, more than 100 years ago. But then the partition of India is also an important part that played into it, the creation of Pakistan with people from Afghanistan that never agreed to become a part of a different nation. Yeah. But then also the fact that in '79, when the Soviet invasion happened, that the US had already gone into Afghanistan and really planted the seeds for terrorism there. They left the Mujahideen there. They really put billions into creating terrorism and creating a breeding ground for terrorism. And they were able to leave. And as an international community, we have built a world where countries like Afghanistan, or most countries in African nations or in Asian nations, they have no voice in international politics. They have no way to deflect any involvement from outside countries. And by using this perspective, we're trying to justify that it is up to us to barge into a country, change their way of politics, and that we have some sort of justification to do that. We just need to understand the country well enough, or their culture. that is definitely something I disagree with. I think that is by nature very imperialist. And I think also if you look at the US invasion in after 9/11, I mean, the Taliban were actually an ally of the US. They had been brought into New York, they had been shown around. There's an independent cover and a whole article on bin Laden, who was called something like the Arab Mujahideen, that some sort of heroic title, because in 1993, America wasn't suffering because of terrorism. That was the Afghan people who were suffering. That's already where the invasion started. Yeah. So to then say that 9/11 was something that happened with good intentions, the US never signed the Rome Statute. Yeah. So there's no international criminal court that can hold them responsible for what they did in Afghanistan. Yeah. So I think to say that there were good intentions, the first good intention would have been to ratify that convention and to be liable for what you do in a different country.
Yeah, so you're saying 20 years is not enough if you look at the time frame and looking at how all of this came into being. 20 years is just like a tunnel vision. You don't see the entire picture if you only focus on 20 years.
Yes.
And you also disagree with Jorrit on the good intentions. I do think that Jorrit specifically mentioned the good intentions of the Netherlands, which was the focus in his work as well. But it's interesting to also look at the relationship between that, of course. Let's save this for a little bit later. Nilab, just to get a little bit more of a feeling of how you are active around this situation here in the Netherlands. What is it exactly that you do with the movement that you co-initiated here?
Well, we started with, during the takeover, we were just a group of Afghan diaspora that were concerned about what happened in our home country. Yeah. So at first we started with a demo, and a petition was started to get political action happening and to get people to show solidarity and to really accept Afghan refugees to come in here. Yeah. Right now we're quite a big group, and we have very different interests. Like we have politicians, people who do law, and we're trying to set up some different projects that we will be working on. So one of them is, for example, to start an archive, because we're losing our culture, and that is something that we have an influence on. So it's different. It's very varied what we do. Yeah, political, but also cultural, and we're trying to shape it right now. Yeah, yeah.
So it's also gaining gaining more attention also for Afghan culture here. But in relationship to what is happening now in Afghanistan, it's also really speaking out on the situation of the evacuations that were and were not happening, and the entire takeover phase. You're quite young as a movement, right?
True, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. We'll also get back to that later. Najib, so we're already in the midst of the discussion. So, like I mentioned, you have worked for the UN. You have worked for several NGOs. You've been really active in Afghanistan. Just to get a bit better sense, like what kind of work did you exactly do there? What did you work on?
So during my work with the UN in Afghanistan, we helped to build the capacity of local communities and also the government.
In which period was this, sir?
It was from 2015 to 2019.
Okay. Yeah.
So during that period, I worked with 2 UN agencies to help build the capacity of local communities and the government in being environmentally resilient towards climate change and disasters, because Afghanistan is prone to a lot of natural disasters. And before that, I worked with an NGO in the field of gender, and gender was such a hot topic after the invasion. People were making reports in West that, gender equality, gender equity in Afghanistan has been reached. Every ministry in Afghanistan had a gender department just for reporting purposes. However, the head of gender departments did not know what gender means. So a symbolic project implementation by West and bringing consultants from Europe, from West, putting them in safe compounds, asking them to build projects for a country they have not seen.
Yeah.
sending pilots from, like, sending drones from the US, which are controlled by pilots in the US, who rely on a very poor intelligence, which is no intelligence at all. These are the kind of interventions that the West implemented in Afghanistan. And enjoy it, there might have been some good intentions in terms of the Dutch projects in Afghanistan, and I can't say no to that, because these projects were funded by the Dutch population. Ordinary people in Netherlands did have good intentions. Ordinary people in Netherlands are paying tax for good intentions, for the government to spend it for a good cause. That is where the good intention starts. But where that good intention is spent, that money, 3D policy of Netherlands. 3D policy does not work in Afghanistan. It's not like a copy-paste scenario that you take a 3D policy from a country and put it in another country and then it works really well. The schools that were built in Uruzgan, where are they now?
Yeah. But this I'm interesting to see what you think about that, Najib, because in the previous conversation, Wally already mentioned, like, it worked. Look at what was built up, but at the same time, we also see the crumbling down of this effect. In the documentary, it was also mentioned, like, have we been building sandcastles there? Was it all in vain, the initiative that was done there? You yourself have been working with the international organizations, with NGOs. Well, what is your reflection on that? Do you have the feeling that, that something sustainable could have been built there or was built?
I mean, something sustainable to build, you need a very solid foundation. And the solid foundation, as Neelab mentioned earlier, the solid foundation was not made strong. When the Russians, the Soviet Union, invaded Afghanistan in 1979, University of Nebraska in the US created textbooks for the whole education system in Afghanistan, which were used until 2003, which trained terrorists in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. I have read those textbooks. Afghans who sent their children to school, who were using textbooks from University of Nebraska, which is an academic institution, were being taught counting by counting bullets and guns and grenades and machine guns and rockets. What would you expect from such a generation? You put an ordinary Dutch kid, an American kid, any kid in a school, they will become a terrorist. So just like Frankenstein, this evil force was created to get rid of the Soviets and then preserved to maintain the influence that they needed to preserve the global order that they want.
Yeah, the construction of the narrative. Yeah.
Which the sacrifices being given by ordinary Afghans, but not only ordinary Afghans. When we are talking about a global issue, we should also talk about the global community, how we can handle and solve these issues as a global community. The Afghan crisis can not only be solved by Afghans. The Afghan crisis, or climate change, or rise of AI, any issue we are facing as a planet can be solved collectively. Collectively, because every country, like now international development and globalization with social media, how everything has evolved in 21st century, it's much more different than the Cold War era in 1970s. So. So we need a global solution.
You do need this international community, but you need it from a very different starting point and building a very different kind of foundation than how it has been done. Jorrit, I want to get back to you because I can assume that you would like to reflect a little bit on what was mentioned earlier about this good intentions. But what is your perspective on this? Do you recognize these stories that Neelab and Najib are sharing here?
Yeah, a little bit about the first point, which was when I said, indeed the Dutch don't have imperialist motives, because I see that as an influence, and I see it as the economics involved, right? So the trade. And we have very little trade with Afghanistan. We have very little influence, right? Over the past 20 years, the Netherlands have had very little influence, right? But about Najib's point, I think this is interesting, and I agree there a lot more. because I have been involved in the last 6 years for a Dutch NGO in also designing development projects. So again, there I think we have the best intentions, but indeed it was right that most of those projects are then designed in The Hague. Then there's a 1 day or a 2 day workshop in Kabul, and then you sort of like present it to the Afghan partner organizations, and they can make a few small changes, but then you're off and you're going to do a project for like 3, 4, 5 years. And that has indeed led to a sort of like parallel reality. Not only parallel in terms of it was not really what the Afghans sometimes needed, but also parallel in the sense that the Afghan government was not involved. So a lot of the donor money, including the Dutch donor money, has been spent outside of the Afghan government budget. So I think that was a big problem as well from the start.
Okay. Wally, I would like to get your reflections on this, but also we got a question from one of the people in the audience asking, what's life like since the Taliban took over? BBC, 5th of September 2029, BBC. On the date, I think. After August 30, I read and heard people saying Taliban is in power now. However, as state-building attempts failed to gain infrastructural power, what power do the Taliban of today really have? How extensive, how influential, how powerful is this, and to what extent not? Conquer a state in Afghanistan is not the same as a state in European countries. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I would add a bit about what was discussed before. I think development in Afghanistan was really impacted by the wrong political and security settlement there. Because the international community after 9/11, they wanted to go to Afghanistan basically to achieve a couple of main things. One was a political settlement, stability and security that never again the West will be attacked by somebody from Afghanistan, and the security that people can live and work and and develop, and also the infrastructure and development like NGOs, international community. But two part of this, some part of this happened. But the two important parts, that the political settlement and the security, this was really a total failure there. First of all, the Afghan political system, the state system was founded wrongly there, which was a presidential dictatorial system, which should be run by one of the ethnic group in Afghanistan. It was just basically so said and so done. And secondly, the security that never, came to a good condition. When you don't have security, when you don't have a good governance that can deliver to the people, then it's very difficult to do development job. If you don't have security, you can go to a district, a community to build a school, for example. Then you don't go there. You send money there, you don't have any control what happens there. So two things very important for a country, security and a social justice or a good governance, which was not there from the scratch. And then later everything was just going wrong. And the government was not able, and the West supported two corrupt presidents forever. They never rethink about that. They never rethought about that. To stop blind support of Karzai, and then 14 years supporting Karzai was a totally wrong thing to do. And then again, totally wrong to support Ghani. We have seen that he left everything behind and fled the country with a lot of money. And he stole the money of the people, international community. And the West supported them for 20 years. Despite all oppositions from the Afghan people, Afghan women, Afghan NGOs, social networks and civil society, political parties, please don't do that. These guys are doing bad things. But the West never listened to them, especially the US never listened to the Afghan people.
And why did you then just mention before that the support for the projects taken there was high, looking at the support within the Afghan community, but also it worked. Is that then this parallel a process that Jorrit was also mentioning?
Yeah, I think this is right, because in the history of Afghanistan, never happened that Afghan people cooperate like mass majority of Afghan people cooperated with this new system after 9/11. They thought that the international community is, the West is here, we work together, there's nobody else to support any terrorist or any mujahideen or the communists. Now every country in the region and the world, they came together that we will build Afghanistan, a democratic society and a prosperous country.
Yeah.
But then Afghan people trusted them. They started to cooperate, most of the Afghan people. And then at the end, this was a misuse opportunity. The international community, the US never used that opportunity. Because Afghanistan is a country that if they want to fight the international forces, they can do it. Because they have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
But this time they didn't. They just cooperated. But at the end, they left them behind.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so actually what you're all saying, I think, is that the intervention by the US, by the West that was being done, it didn't help to build any form of solid foundation that was necessary. In fact, looking at a longer time frame, more than 20 years, looking at the history, it even helped to create this unstable, or to cause this unstable foundation in Afghanistan. And some of the projects that were being done by the international community, they did make an impact. They did bring some form of progress, but it didn't last because the roots are not there.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah?
But I think what's more important is that when we say there were good intentions, I think good intentions means that you try to empower the communities within the country. There's actually a really good article by the Groene Amsterdammer about how the Dutch actually had no opinion whatsoever about going into Afghanistan except to support the US, which was what they always did, which is what they still do with Palestine. And I think something that's really telling is how did the Netherlands act towards Afghan refugees for the past 20 years. I mean, they knew this was, for the last 4 years, Afghanistan has been the least safe country in the world. And we've deported more of them than most European countries did. So to say there were good intentions, I mean, I helped by aid for the chamber when the Afghanistan debat was happening.
Yeah.
Looking into those files in 2019, the Department of Justice concluded that if the US retreats, that every single Afghan that has cooperated with the Netherlands will be systematically executed. And then last summer, when France offered to evacuate people, we said, no, that's not necessary. Up until this point, thousands of Afghans are fearing for their lives because they're left behind by the Netherlands. And then our Minister of Defense, what did she say? She made a sort of remark like, at least the Afghans now know how they could do it. Which means that she doesn't even realize that before the US invasion, Afghanistan was a democratic state. It was not a democracy, but it was a state that was not in any way what it resembles now. I mean, Afghanistan had women's rights to vote before most European countries did. So to say that the Netherlands had good intentions, I think imperialist motives are reflected in going into a state and deciding for the people what you do, how you do it. I mean, after I think there was an airstrike in Uruzgan by the Netherlands, which killed over 120 people. I don't see any justification for that. I don't see any settlements reached. I don't see how the Netherlands has apologized to the Afghan people. So when we say that we do things with good intentions, we take away the responsibility we have towards our actions in the future. And I think for now, it's really important to say that everyone who went in there did the people wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the third fragment, because I want to move the conversation with you all towards what's next, what needs to be done and who needs to do what. And the third fragment, in this third fragment, we will see this women's rights activist, Mahbouba Serraj, whom we talked about earlier. And she is showing us her perspective on how she now needs to interact with the Taliban. So let's have a look, and then we'll continue this conversation.
We have to start negotiating with Taliban. We have to sit across a table from them, and we have to sit down and talk to them. We really have to. And believe it or not, that's the only choice we have now. Every other door is closed. The only door that is open is this one, that we have to talk with Taliban. And hopefully, not only talk, but hopefully the Taliban will listen. Will listen to us, will listen to the voice of reason, and will do what is necessary. Will take the necessary actions. That's what we have to do. And this is the only option left for the people of Afghanistan.
Right. And are you yourself so much active for women affairs? Are you also in the position that you say, even I have to talk to the Taliban to negotiate things myself?
A lot of the women that they are in Afghanistan right now, they're all scared, so they don't want to come out and talk. So even if that's the case, then I can do that alone. But somebody, we all have to do it. It's just, there is no other way but doing that.
And you are not scared to step out?
You know, I really, to tell you the truth, at this point, I really don't have much of a choice, you know. There is a time in life, and as far as I'm concerned, being scared is one of those times that it's affording some kind of a luxury. When I cannot afford it. I really cannot afford it. We have to do something. We've got to do something and take this thing and control it here, now.
یودا رنگ جذاب نوي رنگي چې خلک ځان ته راکش نه کړي. دویم شرط دا دی د زنانو دپاره چې هغه عطر آګین نه وي د کوره چې وځي خوشبویداره نه وي.
Do you think the Taliban is a party that you can trust in? Can you strike a deal with them? Can they be trusted?
Well, you know, as far as the question of trust, and I've always said that to all of my interviews, I do not trust anybody in this world. I really don't. I never trusted the government of Afghanistan before. I don't trust the international community, and I don't trust the Taliban. What I trust is action of whoever is there. That I trust. If they say the words that they're going to do and they do it, that's what I trust. If they don't, I don't trust.
Okay, so for the final part of this conversation, I want to look at which steps should be taken from now towards the future. We got some input from one of the people in the audience, William, who is actually working for VPRO, who says the 8 o'clock news just showed horrific images of hunger, especially amongst children, poverty and unemployment in current Afghanistan. How do the panel members look at the winter that will be coming? The situation right now is extremely difficult, extremely challenging. Human rights activists find themselves with the only solution of interacting with the Taliban. And we also have been discussing both the intentions but also the responsibility of the West, international community, NGOs within Afghanistan. What kind of responsibility do they have? What kind of role do they have? Who has what kind of responsibility to help Afghanistan forward, to deal with the situation that we're now in? So I want to do a round. I just want to see what everybody's perspective is. If you had the power to make someone, a country, an organization, a person get into action, what would be that person or that organization to do that? Wally, I would like to start with you.
Well, there are two things. One is that the Taliban banned everybody from going to work, the women going to work, and a lot of things is not allowed to be done. Like media is not fully working. So of course, if you stop, people from going to work and find, earn money, then there's logically. Poverty.
This is the situation that we get. Yeah.
I think the Taliban tried to use this situation and tried to lobby to be recognized by international community that it should not be done. I think that will be a mistake if the international community will be cheated by the Taliban. That if you to recognize them or to work with them to empower them. But then secondly, there's a humanitarian task, as a humanitarian responsibility for international community and Afghans in an international community that somehow they have to help the people directly and in a way that is not going to help the Taliban to use that money or that help empower themselves because they don't care about people. They are this is a military group. And they were designed for sabotage, for military actions and killing and bringing down a government without any other plan what to do next.
Yeah. So this open door that was mentioned, this is the only option. I need to interact with the Taliban. You're saying international community don't do
No, just not, because this is a terrorist group. It is not like we cannot justify them, how we can do that. The last 20 years we have witnessed that they exploded many times among the people. They killed, massacres, children, people, international community. Everybody knows that, but how we can justify that is not easy.
Okay.
And then I think that helping the people is very essential job for all people in the world to somehow help the people in the winter, and humanitarian aid should go there somehow.
Yeah. Okay, so the international community does still have a role in Afghanistan, in your opinion?
I think on a personal level, everyone can help by donating to the organizations that work in Afghanistan first. And helping does not necessarily have to be through money. Helping can be through raising awareness. Afghanistan has reached to this situation because we neglected Afghanistan in the past 20 years. And now, by raising awareness, by holding our governments accountable. Okay, the same reason that the US invaded Afghanistan and that the Dutch and NATO went to Afghanistan 20 years ago still exists to a much more increased extent.
Yeah.
There's not only 2 terrorist groups now in Afghanistan, not only Taliban and Al-Qaeda, there is more than 23 terrorist groups now. So the reason that the invasion happened in 2001, there's more reasons now for the Western governments to show good intentions. When the Taliban
we don't believe in intentions anymore, right? We want to see good practice.
When the Taliban took over, everyone left Afghanistan. All of the Western embassies evacuated, while the Taliban promised that they will not harm any Westerners.
Yeah. So are you saying that you still feel that the West should have a role?
Yes,
there?
The West should go. If they really want to help the Afghan people, they should not build tanks and guns and bullets. They should get blankets, food, and supplies for the ordinary Afghans to survive the winter.
So, but those are humanitarian organizations or states?
Well, humanitarian organizations are funded by the states. The money just doesn't come out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
The money comes from the government.
Yeah, but it's not a military intervention.
It's not military intervention. I'm just mentioning
mission.
I don't believe in peace mission that can be achieved from an external power. But if you're talking about survival of Afghans in the winter, I think if Western governments want to help, it's a very easy solution.
They should.
Get some planes with blankets and food supplies. Okay. Really easy. Okay. But that's not what we're doing. We're building guns and rockets and bullets to cause more wars around the world. Yeah.
Okay. Nila, this is the also more the how to get through this winter, right? But looking at the role of the international community or of the West on the longer term, if we also extend that time frame, what would be the step that you should activate?
Well, it is a really difficult question because first of all, as I said, it was the Western intervention that got us to this point. So I think at this point we're talking about legitimizing the Taliban, but what does that mean? We left with a peace agreement that had basically two requirements: don't attack the West, don't work with terrorist groups that will attack the West. So the Afghan people have nothing. And then we freeze the state funds, which means this is not because people are not working, this is because state funds are frozen. So inflation happens, and who suffers? Only the Afghan people, because the Taliban has way more connections than we can imagine.
So the door is open in your case.
I think what she said really nails the point, because there is no other way. Like, there's not a plan B waiting for them. There's not a second government that they have that they can rely on. People are left to starve. And what the West is doing now is freezing those funds, because in 2001 or like in 1996 when they left, they were attacked. So what they're doing now is just waiting and protecting themselves. And I think what Najib said is a good point. What we need to do now as an international community is offer the people in Afghanistan everything they need for survival, for education. They need to be empowered, and I think the Taliban are also a product of 20 years of war. I think they are also a product of what Pakistan has been doing, where a lot of these armed militants came from orphanages. And I think if you let the country rebuild on their own terms, they will find a way out of this mess.
And you think that's possible under the reign of the Taliban, in that sense?
I think, yes. I think the Taliban really more than tripled, or I think they started out with, like, how many fighters did they have in 2001? Not even a fraction of what they have now. And I think also a very important point that we never talk about is that before the 9/11 invasion, the Taliban were really not that strong. They actually gave in to the requirement to hand over bin Laden, but no one speaks of that because they needed a justification for the invasion. What happened afterwards is that these good intentions have harmed so many Afghans, murdered them, traumatized them, that you create even more breeding ground for terrorism. So let a country rebuild itself, offer them whatever they need in food, facilities, because I think it's also important to note that more Afghans have died because of the military intervention of the US than really by Taliban attacks. And at this point, after the cries of the Afghan people for over 2 years during the peace agreement, we can't really say we can't legitimize them. We've already legitimized them, and now we're letting the people suffer because of it.
Okay. Jorrit, I will end this conversation with you. What is your perspective? Which steps should the West, the international community, should any one of us take? Well, in this specific situation, to work towards a better future in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I agree. We should really be concerned about the Afghan people, right? There's 20 million Afghan people in need of some kind of humanitarian assistance. And actually, that was already the case before, right? So it's not something new. So it's also too easy to say now under the Taliban, there's political instability, there's humanitarian needs, there is, corruption, etc., because that was there already for the last 20 years. And yes, we are already providing humanitarian assistance. So that was decided at the G20 summit. So the European Union, for example, is also, bringing quite a lot of money there. And in order for that to reach the Afghan people, you need to work with the government. And at the same time, you have a Taliban government that is in need of international funds. It's in need of international assistance, right? The experts have gone. Before, they were criticizing the previous governments as sort of like the puppets from the West. But now they have to provide good governance to the population without a growing economy, without those international funds, etc. So it will all fall apart. So we have that leverage, but it doesn't really take us, into a few more years, right? We need to use it now, because otherwise, indeed, other parties like China are stepping in. And there was a small mention of China in the documentary. China has already, again, started to trade with Afghanistan, right, with the Taliban regime. So they have already sent a plane with the first goods. So they don't care about the human rights. So they're always one step ahead of us, because we are thinking about, oh, should we endorse them? Should we recognize them officially? What about the human rights?
Okay, so you're in that sense you're agreeing with Nilab. We should interact with the Taliban. We should work towards enabling them to reach the Afghan people and make steps at least to get out of this situation.
I think briefly I'll just mention that in order to get away from this situation, we need to get rid of the funding mechanisms that is producing this product line of terrorism. There are thousands of madrasas in Pakistan that still now are being funded by governments creating terrorism. So we need to cut that funding mechanism in order to cut the flow of terrorism into Afghanistan. And once there's no terrorists flowing into Afghanistan, the situation will be step by step more stable. But unless that funding mechanism for terrorism is not stopped, this will keep on going, even if we keep sending blankets and even if people survive the winter, this will keep existing. So that's why the role of us, individuals, everyone in here, everyone listening to us, is to hold our legal representatives responsible. What are they doing with policies that represent us in Afghanistan? Are they building schools that are being blown by an evil force that they are supporting? Because Taliban is a creation of America, which I mentioned earlier. So we need to start from the foundation, build a solid foundation, get rid of the funding mechanism that is still producing terrorism. Because if we don't stop that, this will flow elsewhere.
Unfortunately, we have to round up the conversation, but I already expected at the beginning that we would not be able to, of course, solve such an insanely complex issue. But I think we've touched upon some of the more acute short-term steps that need to be taken and some of the more fundamental long-term issues that also should be addressed. Hopefully we will all be able to activate in one way or another. Your suggestion at least is something that we can all do to put pressure on our political representatives to see how we can influence the situation in Afghanistan.
If I can just add to that.
Final words?
Yes. Right now, the Dutch government is sending all funding to Pakistan. They are now the spokesperson for Afghanistan, but India was trying to help out with 40,000 tons of weed or kilograms of weed, and Pakistan is actually blocking that. So if we can, we should pressure our government to find new partnerships to help the Afghan people.
Okay.
Well, I think that for the
final then, very short.
For the good solution, I think the state system in Afghanistan, the government should be really inclusive, that all Afghans could have a voice and have a participation. And not only one group who's running. This is very short-term solution, and it's going to be again the same crisis in coming years.
And you foresee crisis.
Absolutely. No conflict is going to be much more than it is now.
All right, we have to round up. Thank you so much for your participation. Jorrit, also thank you so much for being with us via Zoom. As I mentioned, this is the last Tegenlicht meetup of this year, of this season. Tegenlicht will be back on public TV on Monday, January 24th. So take note, not on Sunday, but on Monday, 10:05, NPO 2. And the meetup will then be followed upon January 26th here in Pakhuis Zwijger. So you have a couple of weeks without us. Don't forget about us. Please be back. Have a nice winter break. Stay healthy and hope to see you soon.